This is an Eye on Annapolis bonus podcast.
There are some vague words in this world, and the word humanity, for me, is one of them. And I was snooping around on the internet, which always can be dangerous, and I found the definition for humanities as the studies about human culture, such as literature, philosophy, and history, which also seemed to be pretty broad to me. So I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, which led me to Maryland Humanities, which is at the website mdhumanities.org. And they deal in those things. And the person that probably helped me out here is the executive director, who is Lindsey Baker, and who is on the phone with us today. How are you today, Lindsey?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Well, I'll tell you, let's get it out there. I mean, how do you, as the leader of Maryland Humanities, define humanities? I mean, is that definition, the study about human culture, literature, philosophy, and history, pretty much on track?
Sure, I would say it's on track. I think, like you said, humanities is one of those words that we may hear, but we're like, what does that actually mean? I will say the jury is still out on my family understanding what the word humanities means, and also on me at times. But for me, I think about the humanities as these disciplines that really give context to our understanding of our own lives, of lives that are different from our own, and give us a better empathy for people that we encounter or that we learn about or that, we meet on the street. So I think of the humanities. I know many people think of, history and English as those degrees that never, get you anywhere. But as someone with 2 history degrees, I would refute that point. And I would say that it's actually really crucial to understanding and giving context to our world and to our own lives.
Okay, fair enough. And I mean, so it's really the human part of humanities that you see that brings it right in there together. And I've scoured your website. Again, that's mdhumanities.org. And, the programs that you guys have are, pretty impressive. And you guys are part of a grant-making organization, right? And then part of an organization that actually does the work.
Correct. So we both, it's called re-grants in some worlds, but we both give out money in the form of grants, and through that we have the ability to support programming throughout the state that is done by other organizations. So that's wonderful because, of course, the work of 20 different organizations throughout the state of Maryland is going to be different and unique and wonderful in ways that we wouldn't be able to do on our own. And then we have programs that we run ourselves. And so most times people know 1 or 2 of our programs. It's actually pretty rare that you'll find someone that's not on staff or a longtime supporter that knows just the breadth of the programming that we do. Many people that are in schools have heard of One Maryland, One Book, yep. Which is a statewide reading program, or they've heard of Maryland History Day, which I probably would be in trouble, but I always compare it to a science fair, but for history.
Okay. The people that you provide grants to, and I mean, I'm down here in Anne Arundel County. I know you guys are based in Baltimore. You're probably based someplace else right now at this point because of COVID, but I know we've got, some wonderful, what I would say humanity type organizations. And I know that you've coughed up some money to them, Banneker Douglas Museum, Maryland Hall for the creative arts, which I think dropped the creative arts end of that. It's just called Maryland Hall at this point. But there's just so many small little entities around the state that really just dig into the breadth and the depth of what we do have culturally here in Maryland. You look on the Eastern Shore, I mean, you've got the whole Harriet Tubman scene that's out there. You've got Frederick Douglass's birthplace here. He was born on the Eastern Shore, but he had a house here in Annapolis. And it's, it's amazing when you dig deep into it. And you guys seem to be the type of organization that exposes it. I mean, I know I always hear about, the different grants that you're giving out to different organizations. Where do you get the money? I mean, you're not a state organization, are you?
That's a good question. No, we are not a state organization. We are a separate 501c3, so we're a separate nonprofit. We do receive state funding, and we also receive federal funding. We receive some county funding. I think our biggest county funding comes from Baltimore County. And so the money that we use, and this is really in some way in the weeds, but I love it. It's where I thrive, is the money that we receive and then give back out as grants is usually from the state currently. We did, however, receive over $500,000 in CARES Act money, which we re-granted to over 100 organizations in Maryland, and that was federal money because it was CARES Act.
Oh, wow. So you were able to get a hold of some CARES money and then re-grant that out to okay. So there may be an organization that did not want to go through the hassle or did not qualify, or I don't know whether they probably have to qualify, but they just, for whatever reason, didn't apply for it or wasn't granted it, that they're able to get a little piece of that from you guys.
Yeah, I think the operational budget limit for applicants for that was $300,000. So we were really looking at smaller organizations that maybe didn't have the capacity to apply for a federal grant. And we weren't unique in providing this. There are other, organizations that re-granted CARES Act money, but I'm really proud. It happened before I arrived. I'm really proud of the staff for what they did because they turned around a little over $5,000 grants to over 100 organizations. And I can say if you're from a large organization or a large company, $5,000 doesn't sound like much. But I ran a small museum in Laurel, Maryland for almost 10 years, and our annual budget was about $100,000 a year. So $5,000 is not insignificant with that type of budget.
Well, I was involved with the Great Give here in Anne Arundel County for several years when it was active and going on through the Community Foundation of Anne Arundel County. And one thing that, part of my job on that program was to go out to these nonprofits and really sort of get them up on like social media and figure out how to ask for money and use social media to create awareness of your programs. And there's so many that do such great work, such little tiny, I've got a little tiny sliver of humanity that I want to turn around and focus on, but they just don't have the oomph to get it. Maybe it might be the staff. It may not be the time because it's all volunteer and they're not paying anybody. There's any number of different reasons. And that is, like you said, is such a godsend. I mean, for the Baltimore Museum of Art, no, it's, $5,000 is nice. But certainly if you get as you said, a small museum in Laurel with a budget of $100,000, that's 5%. That's awesome. Hey, question for you. How much of a whammy did COVID throw your way?
Well, all of our in-person programs had to either stop completely or had to be put online, just like everybody else. And so what that meant for us in real time was that our Maryland History Day competition, which is the statewide competition for all of our History Day contestants that make it to that level, had to pivot to virtual. It happens at the beginning of May. So that was a major pivot. And I would say that from what I understand, the staff did a fantastic job at pivoting for that. But overall, it's just meant rethinking everything. And I have tried to encourage my staff to show ourselves grace and show one another grace in this time, that a lot of miscommunications can happen, that programs can get stopped halfway through because Zoom, completely fails. And that's tough. That's tough with an organization that's used to doing really good work, to get used to knowing that there are factors outside our control. And so that's been a pivot in and of itself, culturally, that I've been trying to make is it is okay if not everything's perfect, because in my world, who knows when my 4-year-old will come running in the room with a Band-Aid on her nose and jump on my Zoom call. And that's not quite the picture that I would want to put forward in any other context.
Exactly. Well, I don't think you're alone there. I mean, I think I'm waiting for this whole COVID to be done and watch the outtakes of all the Zoom calls across the nation with naked spouses walking in the background, like a cat walking across the keyboard or whatever it may be. I think it'll be an hysterical sort of Alan Funt moment with I'll date myself there with candid camera. Mm-hmm. And I guess you guys have all learned how to become very proficient with either Zoom or Meet or Teams or whatever the latest video conferencing is there.
Yes, for sure. And it's been good. I mean, there have been some positives. We had an author event with a Swedish author, and we were able to have over 1,000 people attend from, I think, 3 different continents. So it's not all, like everyone else is finding with this switch, it's not all negative. If you want to look for the positives, you will be able to find them, although this is a deeply difficult time and really, a time where we all just wish we could feel safe. But we're trying to look for the positives where we can.
It's funny you mentioned that. I've talked to so many people that have come up with a similar thing like that. I know the Annapolis Maritime Museum does a Thursday night lecture series, and it's pretty much all related to the Bay and the history of the Bay and everything else. They said when we can do it in person, we have about 125 people in the big room. But when we did the first one last week, we had like 912 people from all across the globe. Maryland Hall did a live music school with Paul Reed Smith. And 2 years ago, when they had, I think it was 45 students that spent a week there doing it, and they were able to throw it online and everything else this year during COVID. And they had like 900 and some odd students that did it again from all over the world. So you're absolutely right. And what it does is it expands your reach, because who knows whether that person in Nebraska or Montana or something like that, just maybe they were born in Maryland and they just want to check in and see what's happening. And that makes all the sense in the world.
Yep, exactly. You find people attending that never would have been able to under other circumstances.
You mentioned that you were fairly new. I can't remember exactly what you said. So you're fairly new to Maryland Humanities?
Yes, I started in August. So I just hit the 5 month of pandemic leadership.
Really bad timing on your part.
Or perfect timing. It depends on how you look at it, right?
That's true. Well, what is your background? I mean, you said you were at a museum in Laurel?
Yeah, so I come from the museum field. I was the executive director of the Laurel Historical Society for, I think, like 9.5 years. And then I became the executive director of PTAP, which is a heritage tourism organization that has a focus on the environment as well as history and recreation. So that was really interesting. I love that. And then I moved on to Maryland Humanities. But before joining Maryland Humanities as staff, I was a grantee. I was a partner on One Maryland, One Book. I was a judge for Maryland History Day. I worked with museums on Main Street as a consultant and as a partner. So I really was very aware of Maryland Humanities, and I was a huge fan of their work. And I say that, but I truly mean it. I would send their executive director, Phoebe, before me, emails and just tell her how appreciative I was that the organization even existed in Maryland. So it's a really wonderful position to step into, even though, it's got its own unique challenges on a good day, but in the middle of a pandemic, even more so. But it's something that I've really enjoyed, and I'm really happy to be able to do.
Well, everyone certainly sound very qualified for it, and it's always good when you've got somebody that's got the passion for the organization that's coming into it, as opposed to having to learn it on the job, if you will. You had mentioned you guys, as when you were at other places, were a partner, and I noticed that's on the website a little bit. Now, what's the difference between like a partner and a grantee?
Wow, there's $1 million question. Well, in my mind, and I think different Maryland Humanities staff might answer this differently. When I was a grantee, I filled out the grant application and I received money, right? But when I was a partner, for example, with museums on Main Street, I was working with them in the context of bringing a sites exhibit. So it's an exhibit created for small museums. Now, ironically, the Laurel Museum was too small to actually hold that exhibit, but they brought it to Montpelier Mansion, which is also located in Laurel, and we partnered with them in the context of developing programming and working with Montpelier as they created that exhibit. So the partner side of things is really different depending on which program the partner is with. But for example, with One Maryland, One Book, many of our partners are libraries, and they are the ones who actually hold the programming and hold the book discussions and the speakers around the One Maryland, One Book program.
Now, you mentioned One Maryland, One Book. Is that your signature program, or do you not have one? Or
You're trying to get me in trouble.
See, I'm asking you to play favorites here.
Yeah, I can't do it. I would say that One Maryland, One Book is our signature program if you ask a library. I would say that Maryland History Day would be our signature program if you ask a school system, and that Museums on Main Street would be our signature program if you asked a museum. Now, if you asked all three of them in the room to come up with an answer, I would hope that they would maybe say our grants program because it touches all of them. How's that for not picking a favorite?
So when are you launching your campaign? How political. What a great politically correct answer there. Okay, you mentioned you get a lot of money from the state. I mean, how can people get involved with Maryland Humanities?
I mean, there's a number of ways. Again, right? Like we have such a great arrangement of programming. It's really hard to say. But I would say if you're someone who loves to read, getting involved in the One Maryland, One Book program is great because you're reading a book that's being read across the state, and you can enter into conversations and into programming with people all over the state around the same book. I love that. I think that's great. If you are the person who runs a nonprofit that needs funding, check out our grants program. That would be the place to start, right? And if you're someone who's a teacher, then Maryland History Day. I'll bring it to your school if it's not already there.
One Maryland, One Book. Now, where is the best way to get involved in that locally? Is that through mdhumanities.org, or would it be your local library, or same with Museums on Main Street? I mean, there's probably thousands of volunteers that help humanities in Maryland move. I don't think that I'm guessing you don't have thousands of volunteers up in your offices in Baltimore making Maryland Humanities move.
No, we don't, especially not now. So I would say for One Maryland, One Book, your entry point right now, like if you're listening to this in January, February 2021, is go to our website, look up One Maryland, One Book, and take a look at the books that are in our top 10. I think that's really interesting to take a look at personally as someone who likes to read when I, am not managing screaming children. And I would say, look at that list. I think we have a voting mechanism, and I might get something thrown at my head for not knowing this. But I think you'll be able to vote at some point on which book should be One Maryland, One Book, and then getting ready for that fall discussion series. And so reading the book, if you don't have a book club, grabbing your best friend and saying, hey, read this book with me, and then we can attend something in the fall. That's a great way. And it would be through our website would list it, as well as your local library will probably have a discussion. If not your specific branch, another branch within your county's library system. And for Museums on Main Street, it's really a matter of when it comes to your community, because it's usually a museum or a partner that brings it to the community, and then you can actually visit a Smithsonian level exhibit, which is paired with a local exhibit that the local partner creates. But for this year specifically, we have a special initiative through the Voices and Votes Electoral Engagement Program, where this year's exhibit is all about civic engagement, which is great. It's great timing. And they will be collecting oral histories from people in the communities where the exhibit will be. I believe the age range is 18 to 24, so new voters. And I think those are all ways that you can kind of enter into what's happening with the Museums on Main Street program, and that can all be accessed via our website to direct you to the local partners.
Oh, that's great. Well, you said Voices and Votes Electoral Engagement Project. Now that is, and the oral histories, that's a new voter just talking about their experience and their thoughts on the electoral process?
Yes. It is exactly that. That's exactly what it is. It's kind of a two-part thing. One is that we have the traveling exhibit from the Smithsonian, and that's something we do. We have a couple-year cycle, but it's an ongoing thing. It's a different exhibit each time. This year it happens to be Voices and Votes. In addition to that, we received special funding. If you've heard of the Mellon Foundation, they gave funding to the Federation of State Humanities Councils, which is one of our organizations that we work with because we are the State Humanities Council for Maryland, and they re-granted the money to us. Wow. So it's kind of like trickle down. So we got $50,000 right around the election. We found out about it, and it's to create programming between November and March. So November 2020 to March 2021. And so part of that money is going towards the Oral History Project. Another chunk of money for that is going towards a special author event, which will be run by our Maryland Center for the Book within Maryland Humanities. And that will be kind of a capstone speaker. I don't think I'm allowed to release who we think it's going to be, but I'm very, very, very excited. When my program officer told me, I literally screamed because I was so excited about who we're going to have.
I've got everybody telling me, "Oh, I wish I could tell you, but I can't just yet." You're like the third person today, so it's. I mean, that Maryland Voices story collection, that sounds like a really neat thing. I know that the Annapolis Maritime Museum is doing a similar thing, and they're having stories told of the old watermen in Annapolis and the history of the Chesapeake Bay, and they're getting families of the descendants of them to write down what they know of like their family history, and it's really neat to put it together and to really bring history alive. And I think that's just such a fabulous idea that you guys are doing.
Yeah, I think oral histories, having run a small history organization, I always shied away from oral histories because I felt like there was so many legal parameters for doing them. And I just wanted to sit and talk with someone with a microphone and record them. And that just felt like that was not the process that was approved. So I'm excited to see us working with a partner, the Peel Center, to do these oral histories with these smaller organizations. So to help them with that capacity, I think is really important. I love it, actually. And to do it with 18 to 24-year-olds, because normally when you hear about oral histories, it's older audiences who it's let's make sure we talk to them before it's too late, which I think is important, but we don't really hear people early on in their lives and their experiences often.
It'll be a fascinating look back in 30 or 40 years. What was I thinking in 2020 when I cast my vote? It'll be absolutely very fascinating. And I agree with you. I think that you see a lot of the older folks with the history, and I know my father passed away a couple of years ago, and he was a World War II vet. Never talked about it for most of his life, but toward the very end of his life, he decided to get all chatty about it. And unfortunately, before I was able to get down there with a recorder and a microphone to sit down, and he'd agreed to it, to tell me about some of the war stories, if you will, from the South Pacific. He ultimately passed away, so I do have a real regret on that. And I mean, it would have been a fascinating tale to listen to. I am so looking forward to checking that out when that's finally done. I noticed a big green button on the website says donate. I mean, you obviously take direct donations, and any nonprofit does, and you guys certainly are well deserving. I bet all of the nonprofits are. I wish I was Bill Gates or somebody that was able to turn around and actually no, he's like the poor stepchild anymore next to Bezos and Musk, I guess. You do take direct donations?
Yes, we do. Yep. 100%.
And how much is your public donation? I mean, versus your state funding versus downward grants that you're getting from Federation, et cetera?
So it's not as large a portion as we would hope. And the reason is that we do have pretty standard funding at the federal level, which I think is important. But I will say it also comes with a lot of, I don't want to say strings attached because that has negative connotations, but there are frameworks in place of how you can spend that money. And so what private funding does is it allows us to be more nimble. It allows us to make changes in ways that we think will benefit our specific audience in Maryland that may not yet be approved at the federal level. And so, for example, one change that we were able to make, and this wasn't specifically with private funding, but with our granting to organizations, the fact that we were able to get state money means that we can think now about whether or not we want to provide operating grants. So currently our grants program only allows for programmatic grants, but with the state funding, we are able to think, and we are thinking through this now, about providing operating grants to smaller nonprofits. So that's kind of, I know this is a very meta conversation unless you're in nonprofits, but I think easily break it down to say that most funding is programmatic, which means you have to go create a program. We will not pay you and your staff to create that program, but we will pay for the supplies of the program. Okay. And so the shift to allowing operating means we are paying for you and you go do the good work. And we have faith that you're going to do it. But we're going to make sure first that your people are paid. And so I think that in the era of Facebook, and I always see those posts about, overhead costs of nonprofits being vilified, I would push back because we are employees. And if you don't want to pay the employees to do the work, then the work can't be done. And so providing that capacity for nonprofits is really important. And I think most people who work in nonprofits understand that. And I'm happy that we have the flexibility now to even consider it at Maryland Humanities.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we all need to eat, and we all need to make a buck. And I mean, I know a lot of the vilification comes from some of the huge nonprofits where they, have so little money going to programs. It's just a matter of scale as well. I mean, you look at, we'll say, I don't want to pick on the American Cancer Society because I don't know what their specific things are, but, they have a huge, broad reach, and just a little tiny program that they may come up with has a huge impact. Yes, but they do also need to have the overhead support to be able to run the organization as well. Mm-hmm. And when you mentioned, okay, so you did go over the programmatic and the operational grants. I mean, does now an operational grant, would that cover just expenses of operating, electric rent type thing? If I mean, obviously we're living in different times right now, and probably that wouldn't be the ideal intent of it 5 years ago, I would imagine. But today it's, we realize the importance of these small nonprofits, these small museums, and these small programs that you come to your schools and to your libraries and to little pop-up shops across the state that need to continue, because that's where we go.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hope. So operational grants are not a thing that we do yet, but there's something that we're thinking about and we may be planning for. And that would be the idea. And I think it's always easy to think of larger nonprofits like you've mentioned. And I don't have a lot of experience, honestly, with really large nonprofits. I've come from the small side of things. So I encourage people to think of, their local food pantry, their local friends group of their library that gives out books, and their local museum. And we are almost all running on fumes and running on the smallest budgets that we possibly can. So any type of operating support we can give to important community partners like that, I think is a good thing.
Without a doubt. Well, I'll tell you, I don't know whether you're familiar with the in Annapolis here, the Art and Public Places Commission by the city of Annapolis. Art and public places, so it's public art where you could actually walk up to it and see its murals, statues, paintings, and et cetera. And they've come up with a book. And again, I don't know if you were initially involved with the funding of it, but it's a wonderful book, and it's about, I don't know, maybe a quarter inch thick, and it's a great walking guide through the city to find all the different art and what the muralists have done and the statues, what they mean, what their history and everything else is. And I think, again, you talk about, that was something I know that they went out and said, hey, can you give $10 here, $100 there, and to produce it. But it's just such a great resource. And again, you don't realize where and how far reaching the humanities are when you look here. And again, Maryland Humanities may not be involved with all of them, but I mean, you take a look at, the Harriet Tubman, you've got you said the museum in Laurel. You've got all these little gems hidden across Maryland that, really are part of what brings Maryland to be the great place that it is.
I agree. And while we're talking about Annapolis, I'm going to plug my two favorite things in your area, if that's okay.
The Banneker Douglas Museum.
The Banneker Douglas Museum. My colleague and now a board member for Maryland Humanities, Chanel Compton, is wonderful and is doing a great job there as their director. And their Black Vote mural project and the associated symposium that went with that, we supported it, and it was an example, a shining example of what Chanel can do and what her leadership brings to museums. So I have to plug that. And I'll also say I have some buddies that run Historic London Town, which is a little bit outside, but is a favorite place of mine to bring my daughter and just let her loose on the grounds. And their programming is always interesting, when they're able to do it in person. So those are my two plugs for Over Your Way.
And they're outstanding plugs. I mean, London Town has the fantastic gardens when they're in bloom, just some unique native plants, and the breadth of knowledge that the staff has there is beyond compare. And Banneker Douglas Museum is really outstanding too. And for those that aren't aware of that is, I'm going to mess up the street, but I think it's on South Street. But it's right across from the county courthouse, and it's half building and half of an old church. And they've got a great ongoing program right now. And I know a friend of mine, Commissal Brown, has contributed a banner that went into that. And we spoke with the executive director during the Leadership Anne Arundel programming that we had last month, where we studied the arts. It's a great museum. I don't want to say hidden because it's not very hidden, but if you haven't been there, definitely go check that out. The other one I would say would be, when they open up again, would be the Mitchell Gallery at St. John's College, which is a full-blown, just a real great art gallery with different exhibits that come in periodically. So
I have not been there, so I will have to put it on my list, actually.
Yeah, right now they're a little bit virtual, but they and they're wonderful. They've had some great stuff. They get some great stuff on loan from some wonderful museums, and it's a lot of fun. It's again that's more of a hidden gem than others because it's in the middle of a campus on a college campus, and it's sort of tucked away, but it's definitely worth it there.
I was just going to say, I think you're onto something, and I'm in Prince George's County. I'm in Laurel. That's where I live. And I would say that one of the hidden gems statewide are these college galleries. You know, I've been to quite a few exhibits at both College Park and UMBC that, you know, I blow my socks off, right, to use that phrase, are just really strong, well-developed exhibits that really complement the local exhibits I see at small museums. And if you're not someone who's eager to go on to college campuses, because, you know, you never know where to park, and you never know what entrance to go into and all of that, I would encourage you to find one college you feel comfortable going to and visiting their gallery. Get yourself comfortable with where to park and their hours and all of that. And it really is a great complement to all of the local museums we have.
I would say the colleges also have a bunch of great, different speaking events. They have some entertainment that comes in, and you usually can get in on some of that. It's not necessarily restricted to the 18 to 21 crowd or 18 to 22 crowd that's living on campus or taking classes there for sure. But we're on the phone with Lindsey Baker, who is the executive director of Maryland Humanities, and you can find out more about them at mdhumanities.org. They are based up in Baltimore, but not right now. They're based, I guess, at home, and hopefully we'll be back into the offices before not too long. Also on your website, I looked at your motto or your mission, and I thought it really summed up as I'm clicking away here as we're talking. It says that Maryland Humanities is a statewide educational nonprofit organization that creates and supports educational experience in the humanities that inspire all Marylanders to, and this is the thing that I thought was good, embrace lifelong learning, exchange ideas openly, and enrich their communities. And I think that in the times that we're living in right now with division and arguing and everything else, the exchange of ideas openly is critical to a good life that we've got here in Maryland. I think that, you can learn, whether it be political, whether it be educational. And I think that's a wonderful mission for Maryland Humanities and for anybody.
I agree. And that's why I love Maryland Humanities.
What's next? I mean, okay, you said you've been here since August. And what's next after we get out of COVID and you guys are able to run free, and what's next for Maryland Humanities? What's on your bucket list?
Well, not my bucket list yet, but my short-term list is strategic planning. We are due, and we will be starting that in the next month or two. And then a major initiative that I was really brought on with the understanding that this is something that is I've worked on at every organization I've been a part of, is operationalizing racial equity work. And so what does that mean? That means that we take a really deep look at ourselves and how we function both internally and externally, and hold it up to the light and see what changes need to be made to make things more equitable, both for our staff, for our board, for our partners, for our grantees. And so that is that is work that will never be done. So I guess it can be on the bucket list. But it is work that's being prioritized, and it's been great to see it prioritized by both our staff and our board.
Fantastic. Again, Lindsey Baker, thank you very much for your time. I know you had mentioned that you may have a 4-year-old bounding into the room any moment. So I will let you go take care of that. And I'll say better you than me. I've done my time and my children are flown and grown. So, but 4 is a wonderful age, and I appreciate your time. I appreciate everything you've done with Maryland Humanities. I look forward to hearing more and seeing more money flowing to all these great organizations throughout the state. I think it's just we need to involve ourselves a little bit more with that, and I think we'll all be much better for it.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. This was a fun conversation. I definitely I'm glad that we were able to chat.
Cool. Let's do it again.
Yes, for sure.
This has been a bonus podcast from Eye on Annapolis. Please visit us at eyeonannapolis.net. Follow us on Facebook at All Annapolis and on Twitter at Eye on Annapolis. And if you haven't subscribed to the Daily News Brief podcast, go for it. And all of your local news will be delivered to your phone, tablet, or smart device by 6 a.m. every Monday through Friday.